He conquered more territory than any human being in history, building an empire that stretched from the Pacific Ocean to the gates of Europe. His armies killed tens of millions of people, erasing entire civilizations from the map and reshaping the genetic heritage of Asia. He founded a dynasty that would rule much of the known world for generations, creating trade routes and legal systems that connected East and West as never before. And when he died in 1227, Genghis Khan was buried in a grave so secret that it has never been found. For 800 years, the location of his tomb has remained one of history's greatest mysteries, protected by legends of mass executions, rivers diverted over burial sites, and forest planted to hide all traces. Somewhere beneath the grasslands of Mongolia lies the final resting place of the man who changed the world more than perhaps any other, and no one knows where it is. If you're settling in for the night, this is exactly the kind of mystery that works perfectly for sleep. Ancient empires and hidden tombs, warriors and shamans, a secret kept across 8 centuries waiting to be discovered. If you enjoy it, consider subscribing so you don't miss the next journey into forgotten history. And if you want to tell me where you're listening from tonight, drop a comment. I love knowing that someone in Mongolia, and someone in Europe, and someone on the other side of the world are all drifting off to the same ancient dreams together. Now let's go back 800 years to the steppes of Central Asia, where a boy named Temujin would rise from nothing to become the most powerful conqueror the world has ever known. The man who would become Genghis Khan was born around 1162, though the exact date is uncertain, into the harsh world of the Mongolian steppe. His father, Yasuge, was a minor chieftain of the Borjigin clan, powerful enough to have enemies but not powerful enough to protect his family from them. When Temujin was 9 years old, his father was poisoned by a rival tribe, the Tatars, who offered him hospitality and then betrayed him. The death of Yasuge left his family destitute. The clan that had followed his father abandoned the widow and her children, leaving them to survive on their own in one of the most unforgiving environments on Earth. The Mongolian steppe is a land of extremes, bitterly cold in winter and scorching in summer, a vast grassland where survival depends on animals and mobility. Temujin's family had neither. They had been stripped of their herds and their followers, reduced to hunting and foraging to stay alive. This period of desperate poverty shaped the young Temujin, teaching him self-reliance, the importance of loyalty, and the ruthlessness necessary to survive in a world where weakness meant death. He learned to hunt marmots and fish in streams, skills that were beneath the dignity of a chieftain's son but essential for a family with nothing. The young Temujin showed early signs of the determination and violence that would characterize his later career. According to the secret history of the Mongols, the primary source for his early life, Temujin killed his half-brother Begta in a dispute over hunting spoils. The killing was deliberate. Temujin and his full brother Kasar stalked Begta and shot him with arrows when he refused to share a fish and a bird they had caught. Their mother was furious, comparing her sons to wild animals, but the killing established Temujin's willingness to use lethal force to protect what he considered his rights. It also eliminated a potential rival for leadership of the family, since Begta, as the oldest son, might have claimed precedence over Temujin. The early killing was a preview of the countless deaths that would follow as Temujin rose to power, each one calculated to remove threats and consolidate control. Temujin's rise from outcast to world conqueror took decades of patient work, building alliances, gathering followers, and systematically destroying his rivals. He began by attaching himself to Togrul, Khan of the Kharites, a more powerful tribe that had been allied with his father. This relationship gave Temujin protection and legitimacy, allowing him to begin gathering his own followers. He proved himself a capable warrior and a generous leader, sharing plunder with his men and rewarding loyalty with promotion regardless of birth. This meritocratic approach was revolutionary in the hierarchical world of the steppe, where status was typically inherited. Temujin attracted followers who had been marginalized by the traditional system, men who saw in him an opportunity to rise based on their abilities rather than their ancestry. He also showed a talent for strategic thinking, choosing his battles carefully and using diplomacy when force was impractical. The unification of the Mongol tribes was a bloody process that took over 20 years. Temujin fought against former allies and childhood friends, destroying anyone who refused to submit to his authority. His most dangerous rival was Jamuka, a blood brother from his youth who had once been his closest friend. The two had sworn eternal loyalty to each other in the traditional Mongol ritual of Anda, sharing blood and vows, but their ambitions proved incompatible. Jamuka represented the old aristocratic order, where leadership was inherited and commoners knew their place. Temujin represented something new, a system based on loyalty and ability. Their conflict lasted years, with victories and defeats on both sides, until Temujin finally prevailed. Jamuka was captured and executed, though Temujin reportedly offered to renew their brotherhood if Jamuka would submit. Jamuka refused, preferring death to subordination, and was killed without the shedding of blood, a mark of respect in Mongol culture that allowed his spirit to remain intact. In 1206, a great assembly of Mongol tribes gathered at the source of the Onon River to proclaim Temujin as Genghis Khan, a title meaning universal ruler or oceanic ruler, reflecting the ambition to conquer everything under the eternal blue sky. The assembly, called a Kurultai, legitimized his authority through the traditional mechanism of tribal consensus, but the reality was that Temujin had already conquered or absorbed all significant rivals. The proclamation marked the end of the tribal wars that had consumed his early career and the beginning of the conquests that would make him famous. Genghis Khan was now the undisputed leader of all the peoples of the felt-walled tents, as the Mongols called themselves, and he immediately set about organizing his new nation for war on a scale never before attempted. The military system that Genghis Khan created was one of his greatest innovations, transforming the Mongol tribes from feuding nomads into the most effective fighting force the world had ever seen. He organized his army on a decimal system, units of 10, 100, 1,000, and 10,000, called an Arban, Zun, Mingan, and Tumen respectively. These units were not based on tribal affiliation, but on assignment by the Khan, deliberately mixing men from different tribes to break down old loyalties and create a unified army loyal only to Genghis Khan himself. Commanders were appointed based on merit rather than birth, and promotion was available to any man who proved himself in battle. This system created incentives for excellence and loyalty that the traditional tribal structure could not match. The Mongol soldier knew that his advancement depended on his performance, not his ancestry, and that loyalty to the Khan would be rewarded while treachery would be punished with death. The Mongol army's tactical superiority rested on several factors that their opponents struggled to counter. First was mobility. Mongol warriors were mounted archers who could cover vast distances quickly, appearing where they were least expected and withdrawing before slower enemies could engage them. Each warrior maintained a string of horses, switching mounts frequently to keep them fresh, allowing sustained movement that infantry-based armies could not match. Second was firepower. The Mongol composite bow was a devastating weapon, capable of piercing armour at considerable distance, and Mongol warriors trained from childhood to shoot accurately while riding at full gallop. Third was discipline. Unlike the feudal armies of their opponents, which were often collections of independent nobles pursuing their own interests, Mongol units followed orders precisely and coordinated their movements with signals of flags and drums. Fourth was intelligence. Genghis Khan created a sophisticated network of spies and scouts that provided detailed information about enemy forces, terrain, and political conditions, allowing him to plan his campaigns with unprecedented precision. The conquest began with the Tangut kingdom of Xixia, a Buddhist state on the northwestern frontier of China that controlled important trade routes along the Silk Road. The campaign against Xixia, begun in 1205 and concluded in 1209, served as a training ground for the Mongol army, testing its capabilities against fortified cities and organized armies. The Mongols learned siege warfare, adapting techniques from the peoples they conquered and incorporating engineers and specialists into their forces. Xixia submitted and became a vassal state, required to provide tribute and troops for future campaigns. This pattern would repeat throughout the Mongol conquests: overwhelming military force followed by demands for submission, followed by incorporation into the expanding empire for those who submitted, and annihilation for those who resisted. The campaign against the Jin dynasty of northern China began in 1211 and continued intermittently for over 2 decades. The Jin were far more powerful than Xixia, ruling a population of perhaps 50 million people with a sophisticated military that included cavalry, infantry, and fortified cities. The Mongols could not conquer the Jin quickly, but they could devastate their countryside, destroy their armies in the field, and gradually reduce their power through attrition. The fall of Zhongdu, the Jin capital that would later become Beijing in 1215, was a major milestone. yielding enormous plunder and demonstrating that even the greatest cities could fall to Mongol arms. The conquest of the Jin would not be completed until 1234, 7 years after Genghis Khan's death, but the campaigns established patterns that would characterize Mongol warfare: patient strategic planning, ruthless tactical execution, and the incorporation of conquered peoples and technologies into the Mongol system. The destruction of the Khwarezmian Empire beginning in 1219 was perhaps the most dramatic of Genghis Khan's campaigns, a response to what he considered unforgivable insults, and a demonstration of the consequences of defying Mongol power. The Khwarezmian Empire controlled much of Central Asia and Persia, ruling over prosperous cities and wealthy trade routes. Genghis Khan had initially sought peaceful commercial relations, sending merchants and diplomats to establish trade, but the governor of the border city of Otrar, acting with the approval or at least the acquiescence of the Shah, had the Mongol merchants executed as spies and their goods confiscated. When Genghis Khan sent ambassadors to demand justice, the Shah killed some and mutilated others, sending them back as a deliberate insult. The response was total war on a scale that Central Asia had never experienced. The Mongol invasion of Khwarezm was a catastrophe that still echoes in the historical memory of Central Asia. Cities that had flourished for centuries were reduced to ruins, their populations massacred or enslaved. Bukhara, Samarkand, Urgench, Merv, Nishapur, Herat, and dozens of other cities fell to the Mongol armies, each conquest accompanied by slaughter on a scale that contemporary sources struggle to describe. The death toll is impossible to calculate with precision, but estimates run into the millions, perhaps tens of millions. Entire regions were depopulated, their irrigation systems destroyed, their agricultural land reverting to desert. The cultural losses were equally severe. Libraries were burned, scholars killed, artistic traditions interrupted. Some historians argue that Central Asia never fully recovered from the Mongol conquests, that the destruction was so complete that it permanently altered the trajectory of the region's development. Genghis Khan's methods were deliberately terroristic, designed to break the will to resist through overwhelming displays of brutality. When a city surrendered without fighting, its population might be spared, though they would be required to provide tribute, labour and soldiers for future campaigns. When a city resisted and was taken by force, the consequences were horrific. The population would be driven out of the city and divided into groups. Skilled craftsmen and engineers were sent to Mongolia, where their talents could serve the empire. Young women were distributed among the soldiers, children might be enslaved or killed, and the remaining population, particularly adult men, would be systematically executed. The Mongols developed efficient methods for mass killing, assigning quotas of executions to each soldier and requiring proof of completion. Severed heads were piled in pyramids outside conquered cities, a warning to others of what resistance would bring. The terror was strategic rather than sadistic, though the distinction mattered little to the victims. Genghis Khan understood that his armies, though formidable, were small relative to the populations they sought to conquer. He could not afford to fight prolonged sieges against every city, or to garrison every conquered territory with significant forces. Terror solved both problems. Cities that heard of the fate of their neighbours often surrendered without fighting, and populations that had witnessed Mongol brutality were unlikely to rebel once the army moved on. The reputation for merciless destruction became itself a weapon, preceding the Mongol armies and softening resistance before a single arrow was fired. This psychological warfare was remarkably effective. Accounts of Mongol atrocities spread along trade routes and diplomatic networks, reaching potential victims months or years before the armies themselves arrived. The pursuit of the Khwarezmian Shah Muhammad II and his son Jalal ad-Din demonstrated another aspect of Mongol warfare, the relentless hunt that would not stop until the target was destroyed. Muhammad fled westward as his empire collapsed, abandoning his armies and his people in a desperate attempt to escape. Genghis Khan sent 2 of his best generals, Jibi and Subutai, with 20,000 men to pursue him across the breadth of his former empire. They chased him to an island in the Caspian Sea, where he died of disease and despair, a fugitive emperor with no kingdom left to rule. His son Jalal ad-Din proved more resilient, gathering remnants of the Khwarezmian army and winning several victories against Mongol forces before being driven into India. He would continue fighting for years, never submitting, until he was finally killed in 1231. The pursuit of these fugitives consumed years and covered thousands of miles, demonstrating that there was no escape from Mongol vengeance, that resistance would be punished regardless of how far the resistors fled. The raid by Jebe and Subutai extended far beyond the pursuit of the Shah, becoming one of the most remarkable military expeditions in history. After Muhammad's death, the two generals led their force through the Caucasus and into the steppes north of the Black Sea, defeating the Georgians, the Cumans, and the Russians in a series of battles that introduced Europe to Mongol power. The Battle of the Kalka River in 1223 was a disaster for the Russian princes, who had allied with the Cumans against the mysterious invaders from the east. The Mongol victory was total, and the aftermath was grim. Captured Russian princes were laid on the ground and covered with wooden boards, on which the Mongol commanders sat to feast while their captives were slowly crushed to death beneath them. The expedition then returned to Mongolia, having circumnavigated the Caspian Sea and gathered intelligence that would inform the Mongol invasion of Europe a generation later. The entire campaign covered over 5,000 miles and lasted 3 years, a demonstration of mobility and endurance that no other army of the era could match. By the time of his death, Genghis Khan had conquered an empire stretching from the Pacific Ocean to the Caspian Sea, larger than any empire that had existed before. His successors would expand it further, conquering the rest of China, Persia, and much of the Middle East, and invading Europe as far as Poland and Hungary. The Mongol Empire at its height encompassed perhaps a quarter of the world's population and connected the trade routes of east and west in ways that would transform global commerce. The Pax Mongolica, the peace imposed by Mongol power, allowed merchants, missionaries, and diplomats to travel safely across Eurasia, exchanging goods and ideas that had previously been isolated by distance and political fragmentation. Marco Polo travelled to China under Mongol protection. The Black Death spread along Mongol trade routes from Central Asia to Europe. The world that Genghis Khan created was more connected and more violent than the one he had found, shaped by his vision of universal empire and his willingness to destroy anything that stood in its way. The death of Genghis Khan in August 1227 came during a campaign against the Tangut kingdom of Sisiya, which had refused to provide troops for the Khwarezmian War and had thus earned Mongol retribution. The exact cause of death is uncertain. Sources variously attribute it to injuries from falling off his horse, illness contracted during the campaign, complications from wounds received in battle years earlier, or assassination. The secret history of the Mongols, the most authoritative source, is vague about the circumstances, suggesting that the details were deliberately obscured even at the time. What is clear is that Genghis Khan knew he was dying, and made arrangements for the succession, dividing his empire among his 4 sons by his principal wife Berta, and designating his 3rd son, Ögedei, as the great Khan who would exercise supreme authority. The burial of Genghis Khan was conducted in secrecy so complete that the location remains unknown to this day. According to various accounts, some contradictory and all impossible to verify, the funeral procession travelled across the Mongolian steppe toward a burial site that the Khan had chosen during his lifetime. Every person who encountered the procession was killed to prevent them from revealing its destination. The soldiers who dug the grave were killed by other soldiers, who were themselves killed to ensure that no one survived who knew the location. Some accounts say that a river was diverted to flow over the grave, concealing it forever beneath running water. Others say that horses were driven back and forth over the site until all trace of digging was erased. Then trees were planted to restore the natural appearance of the landscape. Still others say that the burial party was itself buried with the Khan, their loyalty rewarded with death so that they could serve him in the afterlife. The extreme secrecy surrounding the burial reflected both practical and spiritual considerations. On the practical level, Genghis Khan's tomb would have contained enormous treasures: gold, silver, precious stones, fine textiles, weapons, and valuables accumulated through decades of conquest. A marked grave would attract looters who might desecrate the Khan's remains and steal his goods. The Mongols had seen the tombs of Chinese emperors and Central Asian kings, elaborate monuments that advertised their locations and invited plunder. Genghis Khan chose a different approach, hiding his grave so completely that no one could find it to rob. On the spiritual level, Mongol beliefs held that the dead required peace and privacy in the afterlife. Disturbing a grave could release angry spirits and bring misfortune to the living. By hiding the grave, the Mongols ensured that Genghis Khan's spirit would rest undisturbed, free from the interference of the living world. The location of the burial has been the subject of speculation and searching ever since. The most commonly suggested area is Burkhan Khaldun, a sacred mountain in the Khenti province of northeastern Mongolia, near the Onon and Kurlan rivers where Genghis Khan was born and where he had hidden from enemies in his youth. The secret history describes Burkhan Khaldun as a place of special significance to the Khan, where he had prayed and received spiritual power before his rise to greatness. He reportedly expressed a wish to be buried there, saying that the mountain had given him life and should receive his body in death. But even if the general area is correct, the specific site within the mountainous forested region has never been identified. The area covers hundreds of square miles of difficult terrain, much of it inaccessible and all of it protected by Mongolian law and custom. The Ikkorig, or Great Taboo, was a restricted zone established around the presumed burial area, forbidden to all but members of the Mongol imperial family. For centuries, this prohibition was enforced strictly, preventing any exploration or settlement in the region. The taboo served multiple purposes. It protected the grave from discovery, it preserved the sacred character of the site, and it maintained a connection between the ruling dynasty and its divine ancestor. Guards patrolled the borders of the forbidden zone, turning back or killing anyone who attempted to enter. The size of the restricted area, estimated at several hundred square miles, suggests that even the Mongol authorities were uncertain of the precise burial location. They protected a large region to ensure that the grave, wherever exactly it lay, remained undisturbed. The Ikkorig persisted for centuries, surviving the fall of the Mongol Empire and the conversion of Mongolia to Buddhism. When the Qing dynasty of China conquered Mongolia in the 17th century, they maintained the prohibition, recognizing its importance to Mongol identity, and perhaps hoping to associate themselves with the prestige of Genghis Khan's legacy. The Forbidden Zone became a wilderness, its forests and grasslands preserved in a state that approximated their appearance in the 13th century. This accidental conservation has made the region valuable for ecological research as well as archaeological investigation, a glimpse of what the Mongolian landscape looked like before modern development. The taboo was relaxed during the 20th century, particularly during the communist period when traditional beliefs were suppressed, but it has been partially restored since Mongolia's democratization in 1990, with the area designated as a highly restricted area where access is controlled by the government. The legends surrounding Genghis Khan's burial have multiplied over the centuries, blending historical possibility with romantic imagination. The story of the funeral escort killing all witnesses has many variants, some claiming that 1,000 soldiers accompanied the body and that all were subsequently executed, others suggesting smaller numbers or different methods of ensuring silence. The story of the diverted river appears in multiple sources but cannot be verified. No river in the suggested burial area shows clear evidence of having been redirected, though natural changes over 8 centuries might have obscured such evidence. The story of the horses trampling the grave is plausible given Mongol funeral practices, which often involve driving animals over burial sites to conceal them, but it does not help identify the specific location. The story of trees planted over the grave conflicts with other accounts suggesting a high-altitude site above the tree line, though it might apply to lower areas on the slopes of Burkhan Khaldun. Some legends suggest that Genghis Khan was buried with treasures beyond imagination, gold and silver from the conquered cities of China and Central Asia, precious stones from the mines of Badakhshan, silk and furs and weapons accumulated through decades of conquest. If even a fraction of the Mongol plunder was buried with the Khan, the tomb would rival that of any pharaoh or emperor, a treasure trove that would transform our understanding of medieval wealth and craftsmanship. Other legends focus on the human cost of the burial, claiming that servants, concubines and horses were killed and buried with the Khan to serve him in the afterlife. Such practices were common among steppe peoples, including earlier Mongol and Turkic groups, though evidence for their continuation under Genghis Khan's immediate successors is limited. The combination of fabulous treasure and human sacrifice makes the tomb an object of fascination that transcends its historical significance, a mystery that appeals to imagination as much as scholarship. The search for Genghis Khan's tomb has attracted expeditions of varying seriousness and credibility. In the 20th century, Soviet archaeologists conducted surveys in Mongolia, though their work was constrained by political considerations and limited technology. Japanese expeditions in the 1990s and 2000s used ground-penetrating radar and other modern techniques to survey promising areas, identifying several potential sites but making no confirmed discoveries. American and European researchers have contributed expertise in remote sensing, satellite imagery, and archaeological methodology. The Mongolian government has participated in these efforts, while also maintaining restrictions on excavation, balancing scientific interest against cultural sensitivity and national pride. The tomb of Genghis Khan is not merely an archaeological site, but a national symbol, and any discovery would have implications far beyond academic publications. The challenges of finding the tomb are formidable. The search area is vast, covering thousands of square miles of mountains, forests, and grasslands. The terrain is difficult, with limited roads and extreme weather that restricts fieldwork to a few months each year. The burial was specifically designed to be hidden, and 8 centuries of natural processes have further obscured whatever traces might have existed. If the grave was truly unmarked and concealed as thoroughly as the legend suggests, it might be indistinguishable from the natural landscape, detectable only by excavation that would be impractical across such a large area. Modern technology has improved the odds, allowing researchers to identify anomalies that merit closer investigation, but technology cannot find what may no longer be findable. The tomb may have been destroyed by natural processes, looted by someone whose success was never recorded, or simply hidden so well that no search can locate it. Some researchers have proposed alternative locations for the tomb, challenging the conventional focus on Burkhan Khaldun. One theory suggests that Genghis Khan was buried in the Ordos region of Inner Mongolia, now part of China, where a memorial complex has been maintained since the 13th century. This site, called the Mausoleum of Genghis Khan, is acknowledged to be a cenotaph rather than an actual grave, but some argue that the true burial might be nearby, concealed beneath the elaborate commemorative structures. Another theory locates the tomb in the Altai Mountains of Western Mongolia, based on interpretations of historical sources that differ from the mainstream view. Still another suggests that the tomb is in Kazakhstan or even Afghanistan, following the path of Genghis Khan's campaigns rather than his birthplace. These alternative theories have not gained wide acceptance among scholars, but they illustrate the uncertainty that surrounds the question and the room that remains for new hypotheses. The discovery of the tomb, if it ever occurs, would be one of the great archaeological events of the century, comparable to the discovery of Tutankhamun's tomb in 1922 or the terracotta warriors of Xi'an in 1974. The artifacts within would provide unprecedented insight into Mongol material culture at its height, showing what the conquerors valued and how they imagined the afterlife. The tomb's architecture and construction would reveal techniques of Mongol building that are otherwise unknown, since the nomadic Mongols left few permanent structures. The human remains, if preserved, could be subjected to DNA analysis that would answer questions about Genghis Khan's ancestry and confirm the identification. The historical significance would be profound, connecting the archaeological record to one of the most important figures in world history. And the cultural impact would extend far beyond academia, capturing public imagination and reshaping understanding of the Mongol Empire. The Mongolian attitude toward finding the tomb is complex, mixing pride in the national hero with reluctance to disturb his rest. Many Mongolians believe that Genghis Khan should be left in peace, that searching for his grave is disrespectful to his memory and potentially dangerous to those who would disturb it. Traditional beliefs hold that the spirits of the dead can bring misfortune to the living if angered, and the spirit of Genghis Khan would presumably be the most powerful and most dangerous of all. Even Mongolians who do not hold these beliefs literally may share the sentiment that some things should remain sacred, that the mystery of the tomb is part of Genghis Khan's legacy, that should be preserved rather than solved. The government has responded to these concerns by restricting access to the most sensitive areas and requiring permits for archaeological research, ensuring that any search is conducted with official approval and cultural sensitivity. At the same time, many Mongolians are curious about the tomb and would welcome a discovery that brought international attention to their country and its history. Genghis Khan is a source of immense national pride, the founder of the Mongolian nation and the most famous Mongolian who ever lived. A confirmed discovery of his tomb would attract tourists from around the world, bringing economic benefits to a country that relies heavily on mining and herding. It would also validate Mongolian claims to the legacy of the Mongol Empire, which is sometimes contested by other countries along the old imperial boundaries. The tension between preservation and discovery, between reverence and curiosity, shapes Mongolian policy toward the tomb and toward the researchers who seek it. The government has generally supported scientific investigation while maintaining ultimate control over any discoveries, ensuring that the tomb, if found, would remain Mongolian property subject to Mongolian law. The international interest in Genghis Khan's tomb reflects the global significance of his legacy. He's not only a Mongolian hero, but a figure in the national narratives of many countries across Asia. In China, he is claimed as a Chinese emperor, the founder of the Yuan dynasty that ruled China for nearly a century. This claim is contested by Mongolians, who see it as an appropriation of their heritage by a larger neighbour. In Central Asia, he is remembered as both destroyer and creator, the man who devastated the ancient cities but also established the Silk Road trade that brought prosperity to the region. In Russia, he is the ancestor of the Golden Horde, the Mongol state that dominated Russia for 2 centuries and shaped Russian political culture in ways that scholars still debate. In the Middle East, he's remembered as the enemy of Islam who destroyed the Abbasid Caliphate and massacred millions of Muslims, but also as the grandfather of rulers who converted to Islam and patronized Islamic culture. The tomb would be claimed by many of these narratives, its contents interpreted through different national and religious lenses. The secret history of the Mongols, the primary source for Genghis Khan's life, and the most detailed account of his death and burial, deserves examination for what it reveals and what it conceals. This text was composed in the mid-13th century, probably within a few decades of Genghis Khan's death, by authors who had access to oral traditions and possibly written records from the imperial court. It was intended for the private use of the Mongol royal family, not for public circulation, which may explain its relatively candid treatment of sensitive subjects. The text survives in a Chinese transcription discovered in the 19th century, the original Mongol version having been lost. Scholars have debated the reliability of the text, noting inconsistencies and signs of later editing, but it remains the closest thing to a contemporary account of Genghis Khan's life that we possess. The Secret History's treatment of Genghis Khan's death is notably vague compared to its detailed accounts of his earlier life. It mentions that he died during the campaign against Xixia, that he gave final instructions to his sons and generals, and that his body was returned to Mongolia for burial. But it does not specify the location of the burial, the manner of the funeral, or the measures taken to conceal the grave. This silence may reflect genuine ignorance on the part of the authors, who may not have been privy to the details of the burial. It may reflect deliberate concealment, an unwillingness to record information that was considered secret or sacred, or it may reflect the passage of time between the events and the composition of the text, during which specific details were lost or deliberately suppressed. The vagueness of our best source is itself evidence of the secrecy that surrounded the burial, secrecy so complete that even those close to the imperial family did not know, or would not reveal, where Genghis Khan was laid to rest. Other sources from the Mongol period add little to our knowledge. Persian historians who wrote about the Mongols under the Ilkhanate, the Mongol state that ruled Persia and the Middle East, mention Genghis Khan's death and succession, but provide no details about the burial. Chinese historians under the Yuan dynasty similarly record the death without describing the grave. European travellers like Marco Polo, who visited the Mongol court decades after Genghis Khan's death, heard stories about the secret burial but did not claim to know its location. The consistency of the secrecy across these diverse sources suggests that it was effective, that even people with access to the Mongol elite could not learn what had been done with the Khan's body. The secret was kept by those who knew it, and they apparently took it to their own graves. The religious beliefs of the Mongols at the time of Genghis Khan provide context for understanding the burial and its secrecy. The Mongols practiced a form of shamanism called Tengrism, centered on the worship of Tengri, the eternal blue sky, and a variety of nature spirits associated with mountains, rivers, and other landscape features. Shamans served as intermediaries between the human and spirit worlds, conducting rituals, interpreting omens, and healing the sick. Genghis Khan himself was believed to have a special relationship with Tengri, receiving divine favour that explained his extraordinary success. His rise from outcast to world conqueror was seen as evidence of heavenly mandate, a sign that Tengri had chosen him to rule all peoples under the sky. This religious dimension to his authority made his burial a matter of cosmic as well as political significance. Mongol beliefs about death and the afterlife shaped the practices surrounding burial. The dead were thought to continue existing in a spirit world that paralleled the living world, requiring the same things they had needed in life: food, clothing, horses, servants. Grave goods were buried with the dead to provide for their needs in the afterlife, and in some cases living servants and animals were sacrificed to accompany their masters. The body itself was treated with care, as it was the vessel of the spirit even after death. Damaging a body might harm the spirit it had housed. This explains the Mongol preference for execution methods that did not shed blood, such as strangling, smothering, or crushing, which were considered more honourable than cutting or stabbing. Genghis Khan's execution of Jamuka without shedding blood was a mark of respect that allowed his former blood brother's spirit to remain intact. The grave was understood as a dwelling place for the spirit, a home that should be comfortable and protected from intrusion. Disturbing a grave was dangerous because it might anger the spirit, bringing illness, bad luck, or death to the violator. This belief provided powerful motivation for secrecy. If no one knew where the grave was, no one could disturb it, and the spirit could rest in peace forever. The elaborate measures taken to hide Genghis Khan's grave were thus acts of piety as well as security, ensuring that the greatest of the Mongol Khans would have eternal peace in the afterlife. The same beliefs that made the Mongols fearsome in war, their conviction that they were instruments of divine will, made them reverent in death, seeking to honour their leader's spirit as they had served his person in life. Burkhan Khaldun, the mountain most often identified as the probable burial site, held special significance in Mongol religion long before Genghis Khan's birth. The mountain was considered sacred, home to powerful spirits that could grant blessings to those who honoured them. The area around the mountain was a heartland of the Mongol tribes, rich in game and pasture, a refuge in times of danger, and a gathering place in times of peace. Genghis Khan's connection to the mountain was personal as well as spiritual. According to the secret history, he had hidden there as a young man when enemies were hunting him, and he had prayed there for strength and success before his rise to power. After escaping from pursuit, he reportedly descended the mountain and declared that Burkhan Khaldun had protected his life and saved his body, vowing to honour the mountain and to instruct his descendants to do the same. The sacredness of Burkhan Khaldun made it a logical choice for Genghis Khan's burial, a place where his spirit would be among friendly powers and where his descendants would know to pay their respects. But it also made the specific location within the mountain difficult to identify. The mountain and its surrounding foothills cover a large area with many valleys, ridges, and forests that could conceal a grave. Later Mongol rulers who wished to honour Genghis Khan would have known the general area but perhaps not the precise spot, making their commemorations at places associated with his life rather than his death. The Korig, the Forbidden Zone, protected the entire region, ensuring that the grave remained undisturbed even if its exact location was forgotten. This deliberate vagueness may have been part of the original plan, protecting the secret by dispersing it among many rather than concentrating it in a few who might be captured or coerced. The shamanic rituals that would have accompanied the burial are lost to history, unrecorded in the sources that survive. We can infer some elements from later Mongol practices and from accounts of earlier Turkic burials, but the specific ceremonies conducted for Genghis Khan remain unknown. There would have been prayers to Tengri and the spirits, offerings of food and drink, perhaps the sacrifice of horses that would carry the Khan in the afterlife. The shamans who conducted these rituals may have been among those killed to preserve the secret, their knowledge dying with them, or they may have survived but kept silent, bound by oaths or fear or genuine reverence for the mystery they had witnessed. The religious dimension of the burial makes it more than a mere disposal of remains. It was a cosmic event, the transition of the world's greatest conqueror from the realm of the living to the realm of the spirits, and it was conducted with appropriate solemnity by those who understood its significance. The succession that followed Genghis Khan's death was managed according to his instructions, though not without tension among his sons and their descendants. The empire was divided among his 4 sons by Berte. Yoki received the westernmost territories, the lands of the Kipchak steppe that would become the Golden Horde. Chagatai received Central Asia. Ogadei received the Mongol heartland and the title of Great Khan, and Tolui, the youngest, received the ancestral homeland near Burkhan Khaldun and command of the main Mongol army. This division created the framework for the successor states that would emerge as the unified empire fragmented over the following century. Each branch maintained its own traditions and developed its own relationship to the memory of Genghis Khan, but all traced their legitimacy to descent from the founder and all honoured his grave, wherever it might be. Ugadei, the 3rd son, proved an effective successor who continued his father's conquests, while also building institutions that transformed the Mongol realm from a conquest state into an organized empire. He established a capital at Karakorum, the first fixed city in Mongol history, where administrators managed the vast territories and tribute flowed from all corners of the empire. He completed the conquest of the Jin dynasty in China and launched the invasion of Europe that reached Poland and Hungary before being recalled. He also reportedly paid respects to his father's grave, suggesting that the location was known to the imperial family even if it was hidden from everyone else. The Khans who followed Ögedei continued this practice, visiting the general area of the burial and conducting ceremonies that honoured the founder's memory, without revealing the specific site. The fragmentation of the Mongol Empire in the late 13th and 14th centuries complicated the preservation of the burial secret. As the various successor states developed their own identities and interests, communication among them decreased, and traditions that had been shared became localized or forgotten. The conversion of the Western Mongol states to Islam and the Eastern states to Buddhism introduced new religious practices that coexisted uneasily with the old shamanic traditions. The Khans of the Yuan dynasty in China adopted Chinese customs and Buddhism. The Khans of the Golden Horde in Russia converted to Islam. The Ilkhans in Persia followed various paths before ultimately becoming Muslim. These religious changes did not erase respect for Genghis Khan, who remained the founder and ancestor, but they altered the way that respect was expressed. The shamanic rituals that had accompanied his burial gave way to prayers and ceremonies in new forms, and the specific knowledge of the grave's location may have been lost in the transition. The fall of the Mongol Yuan dynasty in China in 1368 and the subsequent retreat of the Mongols to the steppe marked another shift in the preservation of the burial tradition. The Mongols who returned to their homeland brought with them memories and practices from their time in China, including Buddhist beliefs that would eventually become the dominant religion of Mongolia. They also brought a renewed connection to the legacy of Genghis Khan, whose birthplace and burial site lay in the territories to which they returned. The northern Yuan dynasty that continued in Mongolia maintained some form of commemoration at or near Burkhan Khaldun, though the specific practices and their relationship to the actual burial site are unclear. The centuries that followed saw periodic attempts to locate and honour the grave, none of which produced verifiable results. The mausoleum of Genghis Khan in the Ordos region of Inner Mongolia represents an alternative approach to commemorating the founder. This site, which Chinese authorities claim as the resting place of Genghis Khan despite Mongolian objections, houses relics and ritual objects associated with the Khan, including saddles, weapons, and what are claimed to be his actual belongings. The mausoleum has been maintained and expanded over the centuries, serving as a pilgrimage site for Mongols living under Chinese rule and as a symbol of Mongol identity in a region that has been increasingly Sinicized. The rituals conducted at the mausoleum follow traditions that claim descent from the original funeral ceremonies, though their authenticity is disputed by scholars and by Mongolians who believe the real grave is in Mongolia proper. The mausoleum's status as a cenotaph, a memorial without a body, is generally acknowledged even by those who maintain it, but it serves the function of providing a focus for commemoration that the hidden grave cannot provide. The 20th century brought new pressures and new opportunities to the question of Genghis Khan's grave. The communist revolution in Mongolia, following the Soviet model, suppressed traditional religion and discouraged reverence for feudal figures like Genghis Khan. For decades, Mongolians were taught to see him as a brutal conqueror whose empire had exploited the common people, not as a national hero to be celebrated. The Ichkorig was formally abolished, though practical difficulties limited access to the remote region. Soviet archaeologists conducted surveys that were ostensibly scientific, but were also influenced by ideological considerations. Any discovery would have been controlled by authorities who had reason to downplay the significance of a figure associated with nationalism and tradition. The communist period left the search for the grave in a kind of limbo, neither forbidden nor encouraged, conducted intermittently by researchers whose work was constrained by political circumstances. The democratization of Mongolia in 1990 transformed the status of Genghis Khan from forbidden hero to national symbol. The new government embraced him as the founder of the Mongolian nation, placing his image on currency, naming the airport and central square of Ulaanbaatar after him, and encouraging celebration of his legacy as a source of national pride. This rehabilitation extended to the question of the grave, which became a subject of official interest and international cooperation. The Mongolian government established new protections for the Burkhan Khaldun area, designating it as a UNESCO World Heritage Site in 2015 and restricting access to preserve both its ecological and cultural significance. At the same time, the government permitted and sometimes supported scientific expeditions to search for the tomb, recognizing that a discovery could bring international attention and tourism revenue. The technology available for searching has improved dramatically since the communist era. Satellite imagery allows researchers to survey large areas from space, identifying anomalies in vegetation, terrain, and soil that might indicate buried structures. Ground-penetrating radar can detect cavities and objects beneath the surface without excavation, though its effectiveness depends on soil conditions and the depth of burial. Magnetometry can identify disturbances in the Earth's magnetic field caused by buried metal or fired clay. LiDAR, which uses laser pulses to create detailed three-dimensional maps of terrain, can reveal features hidden by vegetation. These technologies have been deployed in the search for Genghis Khan's tomb, identifying numerous sites that merited further investigation, though none has yet yielded a confirmed discovery. The Genghis Khan Mausoleum Project, a joint Japanese-Mongolian effort that operated from 2001 to 2010, was one of the most systematic searches conducted to date. The project surveyed a large area in the Khenti province, focusing on locations suggested by historical sources and local traditions. Researchers used ground-penetrating radar, magnetometry, and traditional archaeological survey to identify promising sites. They discovered the ruins of Avraga, a palace complex that served as one of Genghis Khan's headquarters, providing valuable insights into Mongol architecture and material culture. But they did not find the tomb. The project concluded without a definitive discovery, though it contributed significantly to knowledge of the region and its history. Other expeditions have focused on specific theories about the tomb's location. Some researchers have investigated sites near rivers, looking for evidence of the alleged diversion that concealed the grave beneath running water. Others have examined mountainsides for caves or rock shelters that might have served as burial chambers. Still others have surveyed areas near the tree line, where the transition from forest to alpine meadow might have provided a distinctive marker visible from a distance, but concealed from those at lower elevations. Each theory has its advocates and its evidence, but none has proven conclusive. The multiplicity of theories reflects both the richness of the historical record and its ambiguity. The sources provide enough information to generate hypotheses, but not enough to confirm or refute them. The ethical dimensions of the search have become increasingly prominent in discussions of the tomb. Many Mongolians, as noted, believe that the grave should remain undisturbed, that searching for it is disrespectful to Genghis Khan's memory and potentially dangerous to those who would violate his rest. This view has support among some Western scholars and indigenous rights advocates, who argue that cultural heritage should be protected from exploitation and that the wishes of descendant communities should be respected. Others argue that scientific knowledge is a universal good that transcends cultural boundaries, that understanding the past benefits everyone, and that modern archaeological methods can investigate sites without damaging them. The debate parallels similar controversies over the excavation of indigenous remains and sacred sites elsewhere in the world, with no easy resolution. The Mongolian government has tried to balance these competing interests by maintaining control over the search process. Foreign researchers must obtain permits from the government, which can impose conditions on their work and retain ownership of any discoveries. Excavation is particularly restricted. Surveying and remote sensing are generally permitted, but digging requires additional authorization that is rarely granted for sensitive sites. This approach allows scientific investigation while preserving options for the future. If the tomb is located through non-invasive methods, decisions about whether and how to excavate can be made with full information about what lies beneath the surface. The government has also involved Mongolian researchers in international projects, building local capacity and ensuring that Mongolian perspectives are represented in the work. The landscape of northeastern Mongolia, where the tomb is most likely located, is itself a kind of time capsule, preserving conditions that have changed relatively little since the 13th century. The region is sparsely populated, with herders following seasonal patterns of migration that resemble those of their ancestors. The forests of larch and birch, the grasslands, the mountains and valleys appear much as they would have when Genghis Khan rode through them 8 centuries ago. This preservation is partly a result of the Ikkorig, which prevented settlement and development in the core area, and partly a result of Mongolia's low population density and limited industrialization. The landscape that hid the tomb in 1227 continues to hide it today, its natural features undisturbed by the roads, buildings, and agriculture that have transformed so much of the world. The wildlife of the region includes species that have been extirpated elsewhere, survivors of ecosystems that once stretched across Eurasia. Wolves, bears, lynx, and wild boar inhabit the forests. Argali sheep, ibex, and gazelles graze the grasslands and mountain slopes. Golden eagles soar overhead, prized by Mongolian hunters who train them to catch foxes and hares. The rivers contain taimen, the giant salmonids that can grow to 6 feet in length and live for decades in the cold, clear waters. This biodiversity has attracted conservationists as well as archaeologists, who see the protected areas around Birkenkalden as refuges for wildlife, as well as repositories of cultural heritage. The tomb's concealment has had the unintended consequence of preserving a wilderness that might otherwise have been developed, making the search a matter of ecological as well as historical interest. The climate of the region is continental and extreme, with temperatures ranging from -40 degrees Celsius in winter to +30 in summer. Snow covers the ground for 6 months of the year, limiting the season for field work to the brief summer when conditions permit outdoor research. The weather is unpredictable, with sudden storms that can strand expeditions and make travel dangerous. These conditions have always protected the region from casual intrusion, adding natural barriers to the cultural prohibitions that surround the tomb. Researchers who work in the area must be prepared for hardship and uncertainty, equipped to survive in conditions that would be challenging even without the complication of searching for a hidden grave. The herders who live in the region are the human inhabitants closest to the presumed burial site, and their knowledge and attitudes are relevant to the search. Many herder families have lived in the area for generations, passing down oral traditions about local landmarks and their significance. Some of these traditions mention Genghis Khan, claiming that certain mountains, valleys, or springs are associated with his life or death. Researchers have interviewed herders as part of their investigations, gathering information that might guide the search or corroborate findings from other sources. But herder knowledge is also limited. The prohibition on entering the Ichhorig meant that even those who lived nearby did not explore the most sensitive areas, and information about specific sites is often vague or conflicting. The herders' respect for the sacred character of the region is itself a form of protection, deterring casual intrusion and maintaining traditions of reverence that have survived religious and political changes. The relationship between the search for the tomb and Mongolian national identity is complex and sometimes contradictory. On one hand, Genghis Khan is the supreme national hero, the founder of the Mongolian nation, and the symbol of its past greatness. Finding his tomb would be a moment of national triumph, confirming Mongolian claims to a legacy that is sometimes contested by neighbouring countries. On the other hand, the mystery of the tomb is itself part of the legacy, a secret that has been kept for 8 centuries and that sets Genghis Khan apart from other historical figures whose graves are known and visited. Some Mongolians feel that finding the tomb would diminish rather than enhance its significance, reducing a cosmic mystery to a tourist attraction. The debate reflects broader questions about heritage and identity. What do we owe to the past, and how should we relate to it in the present? The international fascination with Genghis Khan ensures that the search for his tomb will continue, whatever Mongolians decide about its desirability. The conqueror who built the largest contiguous land empire in history, who killed more people than anyone before the 20th century, who connected East and West and shaped the modern world, will always attract attention and curiosity. His tomb is one of the great unsolved mysteries of history, a puzzle that has resisted 8 centuries of searching and that may resist many more. The technology will improve, the research will continue, and someday the tomb may be found. Or it may remain hidden forever, its secret preserved by the mountains and forests of Mongolia, by the reverence of those who remember, and by the determination of those who decided long ago that some things should never be revealed. The methods employed to hide the grave, according to the various legends, represent a remarkable commitment to secrecy that has few parallels in history. The killing of witnesses, the most dramatic of the alleged measures, would have required a carefully planned series of executions, each layer of participants eliminating the previous layer until no one remained who knew the location. The logistics of such an operation are staggering. How do you kill everyone who participated in a funeral procession without the final executioners knowing what they were concealing. Some versions of the legend address this by suggesting that the final group of soldiers was killed by a separate unit that had not participated in the burial, or that they were killed in battle before they could reveal what they knew, or that they willingly accepted death as a final act of loyalty to their Khan. None of these explanations can be verified, but they illustrate the problem that the legend acknowledges. Keeping a secret requires controlling everyone who knows it, and that control becomes increasingly difficult as the number of people increases. The diversion of a river over the gravesite would have been an enormous engineering project, requiring the labour of hundreds or thousands of workers to redirect a watercourse and maintain the diversion long enough for it to become permanent. Rivers in the Mongolian steppe are not easily moved. They flow in channels carved over centuries, and redirecting them requires either damming the original course or excavating a new channel deep enough to capture the flow. The Mongols were capable of such engineering, as their siege works and infrastructure projects demonstrate, but whether they would have undertaken such an effort for a burial is uncertain. The legend may be a misunderstanding or exaggeration of a simpler practice, such as burying the Khan near a river whose natural flooding would conceal the site, or placing the grave in a riverbed during the dry season, knowing that seasonal flows would obscure it. Alternatively, the legend may be entirely fictitious, invented to explain the tomb's hiddenness rather than describing an actual event. The trampling of the gravesite by horses is more plausible and consistent with known Mongol practices. Horses were central to Mongol life, and driving herds over a burial site to obliterate traces of digging was a recognized technique for concealing graves. The hooves of hundreds or thousands of horses would compact the soil, scatter debris, and create a surface indistinguishable from the surrounding grassland. If the burial took place in spring or early summer, the grass would regrow within weeks, further obscuring any signs of disturbance. This method could be accomplished quickly and with resources readily available to a Mongol army, making it a practical rather than merely legendary technique. The trampling might have been combined with other measures, such as removing the excavated soil to a distant location or scattering it widely to prevent the formation of a mound. The planting of trees over the gravesite, mentioned in some accounts, would serve a similar purpose of concealment while also marking the location in a way that might be recognizable to those who knew the secret. A grove of trees planted in an otherwise treeless area would eventually blend into the landscape, becoming indistinguishable from naturally occurring forest as it matured. But in its early years, the grove might serve as a marker visible from surrounding heights, allowing the Khan's descendants to locate the general area for commemorative visits. The transition from marker to concealment would take decades, as the planted trees grew and spread and the memory of their planting faded. If the burial occurred in a naturally forested area, the planting story might refer to allowing trees to regrow after the site was disturbed, rather than introducing new trees to a bare location. The combination of these methods, killing witnesses, diverting rivers, trampling with horses and planting trees, would create multiple layers of concealment, each reinforcing the others. Even if one layer failed, the others would continue to protect the secret. A witness who escaped execution might not know that a river had been diverted or trees planted. A researcher who identified the diverted river might not realize that horses had trampled a site miles away. A grove of trees might mark one location, while the actual burial lay somewhere else entirely. This layered approach to secrecy is consistent with the military thinking that characterized Genghis Khan's campaigns, where redundancy and deception were standard tactics. The same mind that planned the destruction of empires might well have planned the concealment of his own grave with equal thoroughness. The psychological dimension of the secrecy is as significant as the physical measures. By hiding his grave so completely, Genghis Khan ensured that his death would be shrouded in mystery, that future generations would wonder and speculate about his final resting place, rather than knowing it with certainty. This mystique enhances his legend, making him larger than ordinary mortals whose graves can be visited and desecrated. The hidden grave is a statement about the nature of his power, which transcends the physical world and cannot be contained or controlled by those who come after. Even in death, Genghis Khan remains elusive, beyond the reach of enemies who might wish to dishonor his remains, and beyond the reach of followers who might make his grave a shrine. The secrecy is itself a form of immortality, keeping the Khan present in imagination rather than reduced to bones in a marked location. The comparison with other famous hidden or lost graves illuminates what makes Genghis Khan's tomb unique. Alexander the Great, the conqueror whose empire Genghis Khan's exceeded in size, was buried in Alexandria in a tomb that was visited by Roman emperors and described by ancient writers. That tomb has since been lost, its location unknown despite being in a major city continuously inhabited for over 2,000 years. The disappearance of Alexander's tomb resulted from the accidents of history, from fires, earthquakes, and urban development that destroyed or buried the monument. Genghis Khan's tomb, by contrast, was hidden deliberately, its location concealed from the start rather than lost through subsequent events. The intentionality of the concealment makes it both more impressive and more likely to succeed. A grave hidden by accident might be rediscovered by accident, but a grave hidden by design is protected against discovery by design. Attila the Hun, another steppe conqueror who terrorized the civilized world, was reportedly buried in a triple coffin of gold, silver and iron, placed in a secret grave with his treasures and the slaves who had dug the grave killed to preserve the secret. This account from the Byzantine historian Jordanes parallels the legends about Genghis Khan's burial and may have influenced them. Whether the parallel reflects actual practices common among steppe peoples, or whether later traditions about Genghis Khan borrowed elements from earlier accounts of Attila, is uncertain. Attila's grave has also never been found, despite occasional claims and searches. The similarity of the two traditions suggests that secret burial was indeed practiced by nomadic conquerors. Whether the specific legends accurately describe the methods used or represent elaborated versions of simpler practices. The tomb of Qin Shi Huang, the first emperor of China, provides a contrasting example of a ruler who chose monument over concealment. The emperor's tomb complex, including the famous terracotta warriors discovered in 1974, was designed to be impressive and enduring, a statement of power that would last for eternity. The tomb mound is visible from miles away, and ancient sources describe its elaborate contents, including rivers of mercury flowing through a miniature landscape of the empire. The tomb has never been excavated, partly for technical reasons and partly out of respect for the emperor's wishes that his rest not be disturbed, but its location has always been known. Qin Shi Huang sought immortality through monumentality, building on a scale that would ensure his memory lasted forever. Genghis Khan sought a different kind of immortality through invisibility, ensuring that his grave could never be violated because it could never be found. The pharaohs of Egypt pursued monumentality even further, building pyramids that have survived for 4,500 years as the most visible tombs in history. The pyramids failed to protect their contents. Every pharaonic tomb discovered by archaeologists had already been looted in antiquity, often within decades of the burial. The kings of the New Kingdom, learning from this experience, abandoned pyramid construction in favour of hidden tombs cut into the cliffs of the Valley of the Kings. This concealment was more successful, with Tutankhamun's tomb surviving intact until its discovery in 1922, but it was not absolute. Other tombs in the valley were found and robbed in ancient times. Genghis Khan's approach was more radical than any Egyptian solution, hiding the grave not in a valley or a cliff, but in a vast landscape with no markers to guide the searcher. The Egyptian compromise between monumentality and concealment yielded to complete concealment, trading grandeur for security. Modern attempts to hide graves have generally been less successful than ancient ones, partly because modern technology makes discovery easier and partly because modern secrets are harder to keep. The grave of Osama bin Laden, reportedly at sea to prevent it becoming a shrine, is known in its general location even if the specific coordinates are classified. The grave of Adolf Hitler does not exist. His body was burned and the ashes scattered by Soviet soldiers who wanted to prevent any possibility of a monument. These modern solutions reflect the same concerns that motivated the concealment of Genghis Khan's grave, the fear that a marked burial site could become a focus for followers or a target for enemies. But they lack the mystery that surrounds Genghis Khan's tomb, the uncertainty about whether the grave exists and where it might be. Modern concealment is prosaic, ancient concealment is romantic, inviting imagination and speculation that modern facts would foreclose. The cultural resonance of the hidden tomb extends beyond its historical significance to its symbolic meaning. The grave that cannot be found represents the limits of human knowledge, the persistence of mystery in a world that seems increasingly mapped and measured. Genghis Khan conquered the known world, but his final resting place remains beyond the reach of his successors, a reminder that some things escape even the most powerful. The hidden tomb is a metaphor for death itself, the ultimate mystery that awaits everyone but that no one can truly know until they experience it. The search for the tomb becomes a search for meaning, an attempt to make sense of mortality by locating and understanding the death of the greatest mortal. Whether the tomb is ever found or not, the search itself is valuable, a human effort to confront and comprehend the incomprehensible. The legacy of Genghis Khan extends far beyond the mystery of his grave, shaping the world in ways that are still visible today. The genetic impact of his conquests is perhaps the most intimate, with studies suggesting that approximately 16 million men alive today carry a Y chromosome lineage that traces back to a single individual who lived in Mongolia around the time of Genghis Khan. This genetic legacy reflects not just the Khan's personal descendants, but the reproductive success of his male line descendants, who ruled the Mongol Empire and its successor states for centuries. The Khans, princes and nobles of the Mongol world had access to multiple wives and concubines, producing large numbers of children who inherited their father's privileged position. This genetic expansion was a consequence of political power, a biological footprint of conquest that persists long after the empire itself has dissolved. The political legacy of the Mongol Empire is more complex, comprising both destruction and creation. The conquest devastated regions that had been among the most prosperous and culturally advanced in the world, killing millions and disrupting civilizations that had endured for centuries. The cities of Central Asia, the heartland of Islamic civilization, never fully recovered from the Mongol onslaught. Regions that had been centers of learning and commerce became backwaters, their populations reduced, their irrigation systems destroyed, their cultural traditions interrupted. Persia suffered similarly, as did the agricultural regions of China, where the population declined dramatically under Mongol rule. The death toll of the Mongol conquests is impossible to calculate precisely, but estimates range from tens of millions to as many as 40 million, a significant percentage of the world's population at the time, and a number that would not be exceeded until the 20th century. But the Mongol Empire also created connections that transformed the world. The Pax Mongolica, the peace imposed by Mongol power across Eurasia, allowed trade and communication on a scale never before possible. Merchants travelled safely from China to the Mediterranean, carrying silk, spices and luxury goods that had previously been available only through long chains of intermediaries. Missionaries, diplomats, and adventurers crossed the continent, bringing back reports of distant lands that expanded European knowledge of the world. Technologies moved along these routes as well. Gunpowder, printing, and the compass, all Chinese inventions, reached Europe during or shortly after the Mongol period, with transformative effects on warfare, learning, and navigation. The Mongol Empire was a catalyst for globalization, connecting regions that had been isolated and setting in motion processes that would culminate in the modern interconnected world. The legal and administrative innovations of the Mongol Empire had lasting effects on the peoples they conquered. The Yasa, the law code attributed to Genghis Khan, established principles of governance that were adopted by successor states across Eurasia. Religious tolerance, a policy driven by pragmatism rather than principle, allowed diverse communities to coexist under Mongol rule, and influenced later empires that sought to govern religiously diverse populations. The postal system, the yam, created infrastructure for communication that some successor states maintained long after Mongol rule ended. The census and taxation systems developed to manage the empire provided models for later administrative practices. Even the destruction had unintended consequences. The depopulation of Central Asia allowed the rise of new powers and the reshaping of political geography that would characterize the region for centuries. The cultural legacy of Genghis Khan varies dramatically by region, reflecting the different experiences of peoples who were conquered, allied, or descended from the Mongols. In Mongolia, he is the national hero, the founder of the nation, whose image appears on currency, stamps, and public monuments, whose name is given to children, streets, and institutions. The rehabilitation of Genghis Khan after the communist period was accompanied by intensive efforts to reclaim and celebrate the Mongol heritage, including the search for the tomb that represents the ultimate connection to the founder. In China, he is a more ambiguous figure, claimed as a Chinese emperor by virtue of his descendants' rule over China, but also remembered as a foreign conqueror who devastated Chinese populations. In Central Asia and the Middle East, memories of the destruction coexist with recognition of the cultural achievements of Mongol-descended dynasties and the connections that Mongol rule made possible. The representation of Genghis Khan in Western culture has shifted over time from horrified fascination with the destroyer of civilizations to more nuanced appreciation of his achievements. Medieval Europeans saw the Mongols as a scourge from God, punishment for Christian sins, and Genghis Khan as a demonic figure whose very name inspired terror. Later, Western writers found in the Mongol story a mirror for their own imperial ambitions, celebrating the conquest while deploring the methods. Modern historians have attempted to understand Genghis Khan in his own context, neither demonizing nor romanticizing, but analyzing the factors that made his achievements possible and the consequences they produced. The search for his grave is part of this ongoing effort to know the man behind the legend, to connect the historical figure to the physical remains that would confirm his humanity even as they enhance his mystique. The oral traditions of Mongolia preserve memories and stories about Genghis Khan that supplement and sometimes contradict the written sources. These traditions were transmitted through generations of herders and shamans, told around campfires and in felt tents, adapted to changing circumstances while maintaining connections to a legendary past. Some traditions claim knowledge of the tomb's location, passed down through families that supposedly participated in the burial or learned the secret from those who did. These claims are impossible to verify and are treated skeptically by scholars, but they illustrate the importance of the tomb in Mongolian cultural memory. The hidden grave is not just a historical mystery but a living tradition, a story that continues to be told and embellished and believed. The shamanic traditions of Mongolia include rituals and beliefs that relate to the spirits of the dead and the places where they dwell. Although Buddhism has been the dominant religion of Mongolia for centuries, shamanic practices survive alongside Buddhist ones, particularly in rural areas where the old traditions were never fully displaced. Shamans still conduct rituals to communicate with spirits, heal the sick, and interpret omens, drawing on knowledge that they claim connects them to the practices of Genghis Khan's time. Some shamans assert special knowledge of sacred sites, including the areas associated with the Khan's burial, knowledge that they guard as closely as the original burial party guarded theirs. The intersection of shamanic tradition with historical investigation creates complicated dynamics. Researchers must navigate between treating shamanic claims as data and treating them as folklore, respecting traditional knowledge while applying critical methods. The modern economy of Mongolia has created new pressures on the heritage represented by Genghis Khan's tomb. Mining is a major industry, with foreign companies extracting copper, gold, and coal from deposits across the country. Some of these deposits lie in areas of historical and cultural significance, creating conflicts between economic development and heritage preservation. The areas around Burkhan Khaldun have so far been protected from mining, but the pressure exists and may intensify as global demand for minerals increases. Tourism is another economic factor, with foreign visitors drawn to Mongolia by its natural beauty and its history. A confirmed discovery of Genghis Khan's tomb would transform tourism to the region, bringing economic benefits but also risks of overdevelopment and commercialization. The balance between preservation and development, between cultural significance and economic necessity, shapes Mongolian policy toward the tomb and toward heritage generally. The climate change affecting Mongolia adds urgency to questions about the tomb and its preservation. The Mongolian steppe is warming faster than the global average, with effects on vegetation, wildlife, and hydrology that are already visible. Permafrost, the permanently frozen ground that underlies much of the northern regions, is melting, which can cause ground subsidence and alter water flows. If the tomb lies in permafrost, its condition may change as the frozen ground thaws, potentially exposing buried materials, but also potentially destroying them. The ecological systems that have protected the region for centuries are changing, and with them the conditions that have kept the grave hidden. Climate change adds a ticking clock to the search, suggesting that the opportunity to find the tomb in good condition may be time-limited. The intersection of technology and tradition in the search for the tomb represents a broader dynamic that characterizes many aspects of modern Mongolia. Satellite imagery and ground-penetrating radar coexist with shamanic rituals and herder knowledge, each offering different kinds of insight into the question. Young Mongolians trained in modern scientific methods work alongside elders who carry traditional knowledge, sometimes collaborating and sometimes conflicting. The tomb search is a microcosm of Mongolian society, where ancient ways and modern methods meet and mingle, where national identity is negotiated between reverence for the past and engagement with the present. Whether the tomb is found through technology or tradition, through systematic survey or accidental discovery, its meaning will be shaped by this dynamic, interpreted through lenses both ancient and modern. The night is growing late, and we have travelled together across 8 centuries and thousands of miles, from the birth of a chieftain's son on the Mongolian steppe to the mystery that still surrounds his final rest. We have followed Genghis Khan through his rise from outcast to conqueror, through the campaigns that reshaped the world, through the death that came during his final war and the burial that no one has ever found. We have considered the methods that might have been used to hide the grave, the places where it might lie, the searches that have sought it and failed. We have reflected on what the hidden tomb means for Mongolia and for the world, for history and for the human effort to understand mortality. The grave remains hidden, protected by mountains and forests, by tradition and law, by the determination of those who decided long ago that Genghis Khan's rest should never be disturbed. The horses of Mongolia, the animals that carried Genghis Khan's armies across continents, remain central to Mongolian culture and may hold clues to the tomb's location. Mongol horses are small but extraordinarily hardy, capable of surviving on sparse forage and enduring extremes of temperature that would kill other breeds. They were the foundation of Mongol military power, providing the mobility and endurance that allowed small armies to defeat larger forces and project power across vast distances. The relationship between Mongols and their horses is intimate, developed over thousands of years of coevolution on the steppe. Children learn to ride before they can walk, and adults may spend more time on horseback than on foot. The horse is not merely a tool but a companion, a partner in the challenges of nomadic life. The role of horses in the burial legends is significant. The trampling of the gravesite by horse herds was supposedly a key method of concealment, and horses may have been sacrificed to accompany the Khan in the afterlife. The secret history describes Genghis Khan's attachment to particular horses, animals that he rode in battle, and whose names were remembered alongside their master's deeds. If horses were buried with the Khan, their remains might be identifiable through archaeological methods, providing evidence of the burial even if the human remains are not found. Horse bones and equipment have been discovered at other Mongol burial sites, establishing precedents that might apply to the Khan's grave as well. The horses that served Genghis Khan in life may serve him still in death, their silent presence marking the location that humans have sought for 8 centuries. The eagles that soar above the Mongolian steppe have their own connection to Genghis Khan's legend. Eagle hunting is an ancient tradition among the Mongols and other Central Asian peoples, with hunters training golden eagles to catch foxes, hares, and even wolves. Genghis Khan himself was reportedly an eagle hunter, and the bird became associated with his dynasty, appearing in imperial imagery and symbolism. The eagle's perspective, looking down from great heights, offers a view of the landscape that ground-based observers cannot achieve. Some researchers have speculated that the tomb's concealment was designed to be effective against aerial as well as terrestrial observation, hidden beneath tree cover or in terrain that looks unremarkable from above. The eagles that hunt above Bergen may pass over the grave without recognizing it, just as the satellites and aircraft that survey the region have failed to identify it conclusively. The wolves of Mongolia also figure in the Genghis Khan legend, and their presence in the region of the tomb is part of its wilderness character. According to the secret history, the Mongols traced their ancestry to a union between a blue-grey wolf and a fallow deer, mythological ancestors who gave the Mongol people their distinctive characteristics. Genghis Khan's own name, Temujin, may derive from a word meaning blacksmith, but his rise to power was seen as fulfilling the destiny of the wolf people, predators who would dominate the steppe. Wolves still roam the forests and grasslands of northeastern Mongolia, their howls echoing through the same valleys where the Khan may lie buried. The wildness that wolves represent is part of what the Ikkorig protected, a landscape where nature continues to operate as it did, before human intervention became so pervasive elsewhere. The rivers that flow through the Khenti region are central to many theories about the tomb's location. The Onon River, where Genghis Khan was born and where the Kurultai proclaimed him ruler in 1206, is the most frequently mentioned in connection with the burial. Some theories suggest that the tomb lies near the headwaters of the Onon, in the mountains where the river begins its journey toward the Pacific. Others focus on the Kurlen River, another major waterway in the region, or on smaller streams that might have been dammed or diverted to cover the grave. The hydrology of the region is complex, with seasonal variations that dramatically change the appearance and flow of watercourses. A site that is dry in late summer might be flooded in spring, and vice versa. Researchers have used hydrological analysis to identify areas where river diversion might have been possible, though none of these analyses has produced a confirmed result. The seasons of Mongolia create a rhythm that would have shaped the burial, and that shapes the search today. Winter in northeastern Mongolia is brutally cold, with temperatures dropping far below freezing and snow covering the ground for months. Digging a grave in frozen ground would have been extremely difficult, suggesting that the burial either took place before winter set in or involved techniques for softening the frozen earth. The death of Genghis Khan in August 1227 would have allowed time for a burial before the ground froze, though the funeral procession would have had to move quickly to reach the burial site and complete the interment. Modern researchers face similar seasonal constraints. Fieldwork is only practical during the brief summer months when the ground is accessible and the weather permits outdoor activity. The window for searching is narrow, and each year that passes without a discovery is a year lost to the seasonal cycle. The stars that shine over Mongolia at night are the same stars that guided Mongol navigators across the steppe 8 centuries ago. The Mongols had sophisticated knowledge of the night sky, using stellar positions to navigate during the long nights of winter and to time agricultural and pastoral activities. Some theories about the tomb suggest astronomical alignments, arguing that the burial site was chosen to correspond with significant celestial features, or that markers were placed according to stellar positions. Such alignments are difficult to detect after 8 centuries of celestial motion, as the positions of stars relative to the horizon change over time due to precession. But the idea that the tomb incorporates astronomical knowledge is consistent with what we know of Mongol culture, which regarded the eternal blue sky as the supreme deity and the stars as indicators of cosmic order. The felt tents called gyrs or yurts that Mongols live in today descend from the mobile dwellings that Genghis Khan and his people used 8 centuries ago. These circular tents, easily assembled and disassembled, were perfectly adapted to nomadic life on the steppe, providing shelter that could be moved as the herds required. Genghis Khan conducted his empire from a gyr, receiving ambassadors and issuing orders from a dwelling that could be packed onto carts and transported across continents. The simplicity of Mongol material culture was deceptive. Behind the felt walls and wooden frames lay a sophisticated understanding of engineering, textiles, and logistics that enabled the Mongol conquests. The gyr remains the symbol of Mongolian identity, used by herders in the countryside and appearing decoratively in the cities, a connection to the past that Genghis Khan represents. The burial practices of the Mongols, as far as we can reconstruct them, varied by status and region, but shared certain common features. Commoners were often buried simply, with few grave goods, in unmarked locations that were quickly reclaimed by the steppe. The bodies might be exposed on platforms for birds to consume, a practice called sky burial that was also known in Tibet and other parts of Central Asia. Or they might be buried in shallow graves that would be trampled by livestock. The souls of the dead were thought to require release from the body, which the various burial methods facilitated. For nobility and warriors, more elaborate provisions were made, grave goods including weapons, horses, and sometimes servants, burial mounds that marked the location, ceremonies that honoured the deceased and ensured their comfort in the afterlife. The extremity of Genghis Khan's secret burial departed from these norms, requiring an unusual level of concealment that reflected his unusual status. The treasures that might be buried with Genghis Khan have fueled speculation for centuries. The Mongol conquests accumulated wealth on a scale never before seen, looting the treasuries of Chinese emperors, Central Asian emirs, and Persian shahs. Gold, silver, precious stones, fine textiles, weapons, and artifacts from across the known world flowed into Mongol hands. Some of this wealth was distributed among the warriors who had won it. Some was consumed in the feasting and gift-giving that Mongol culture celebrated. Some was invested in the administration and infrastructure of the empire. But some was surely reserved for the Khan himself, personal treasure that would accompany him to the afterlife. If even a fraction of Genghis Khan's accumulated wealth was buried with him, the tomb would contain riches beyond calculation, a treasure trove that would exceed even the tomb of Tutankhamun in value and significance. The weapons of a Mongol warrior were his most personal possessions, the tools that had won him wealth and status, and they would naturally accompany him in death. Genghis Khan's weapons, forged by the finest smiths of the empire, and perhaps including captured masterpieces from conquered civilizations, would be among the most significant artifacts in any burial. The Mongol composite bow, the weapon that gave them their military superiority, was a technological marvel that took years to construct, and that could send arrows with devastating accuracy across long distances. The Khan's bow, if it survived burial intact, would be an object of immense historical and technical interest. His swords, daggers, and other weapons would similarly illuminate the martial culture that conquered the world. The armour that protected him in battle, likely a combination of Mongol leather and mail, acquired from conquered peoples, would show how the Mongols adapted and adopted the military technologies they encountered. The textiles that a Mongol Khan possessed reflected both practical necessity and imperial luxury. Silk, acquired through trade and conquest from China, was highly prized for its beauty and its practical properties, including resistance to arrow penetration that made it useful in armour. Felt, the traditional Mongol fabric, was used for clothing, tents, and saddle blankets, its warmth and durability essential for life on the steppe. Gold-threaded brocades, fur-lined robes, and garments decorated with precious stones were marks of royal status, displayed at court and bestowed as gifts. If Genghis Khan was buried in his finest clothing, with additional textiles laid in the grave, the preservation of these fabrics would depend on conditions within the tomb. Dry, cold conditions favour textile preservation. Wet or fluctuating conditions cause decay. The climate of northeastern Mongolia might provide favourable conditions, particularly if the tomb lies in permafrost, but without knowing the specific location and construction of the grave, preservation cannot be assumed. The household goods that might accompany a Khan to the afterlife would include items for daily use: dishes, cups, furniture, gaming pieces, musical instruments. The Mongols adopted luxury goods from the cultures they conquered, incorporating Chinese ceramics, Persian metalwork, and Central Asian carpets into their material culture. A Khan's household would include the finest examples of such goods, items chosen for their beauty and quality, as well as their utility. If buried with Genghis Khan, these artifacts would provide evidence of the cultural fusion that characterized the Mongol Empire, showing how the conquerors absorbed and transformed the cultures they encountered. The grave goods would be a time capsule of Mongol civilization at its height, preserved by the same secrecy that has hidden the grave itself. The archaeological evidence from other Mongol period sites provides context for imagining what Genghis Khan's tomb might contain. Excavations at Mongol cemeteries and settlement sites have yielded artifacts that illuminate daily life during the empire, including pottery, metalwork, coins, and ornaments. The tomb of a Mongol noble discovered in the Altai Mountains contained gold ornaments, weapons, and the remains of horses sacrificed for the burial, suggesting the kinds of goods that might accompany a ruler of even higher status. Chinese sources describe the burials of later Mongol Khans, though these took place under conditions different from the original burial of Genghis Khan, with Buddhist influences that may have altered traditional practices. The accumulating archaeological record provides comparisons and expectations, helping researchers understand what they might find if the tomb is ever located. The DNA evidence that might be recovered from the tomb would have profound implications for historical and genetic research. Genghis Khan's genetic lineage, as noted earlier, is believed to have spread extraordinarily widely through his descendants, making him one of the most reproductively successful individuals in human history. Recovering his actual DNA would allow definitive identification of this lineage, confirming or refuting the genetic studies that have proposed it based on statistical inference. His DNA would also reveal information about his ancestry, health, and physical characteristics, details that cannot be recovered from historical sources. The identification of remains in the tomb as Genghis Khan's would require either DNA matching against known descendants or distinctive features corroborated by historical accounts. Without such identification, any burial discovered would remain uncertain, its connection to the Khan a matter of inference rather than proof. The physical anthropology of remains in the tomb would complement the genetic evidence, revealing information about diet, disease, injury, and physical activity. Genghis Khan reportedly suffered injuries in battle, and marks on his bones might confirm these accounts. His diet, heavy in meat and dairy products as was traditional for steppe nomads, would leave chemical signatures in his bones that could be analysed. His age at death, estimated from historical sources as his mid-60s, could be confirmed or revised through skeletal analysis. The preservation of remains would depend on conditions within the tomb. Bones survive better than soft tissue, and dental remains are often the best preserved elements. If the accounts of human sacrifice at the burial are accurate, the remains of sacrificed individuals would provide additional anthropological data, illuminating social relationships and burial practices. The horses that may have been buried with Genghis Khan would be archaeologically significant in their own right. Mongol horses were a distinct breed, smaller and hardier than the horses of sedentary civilizations, adapted to the harsh conditions of the steppe. Their skeletal remains would show characteristics that could be compared with other horse populations, ancient and modern. Horse equipment, including saddles, bridles, and armor, would reveal Mongol technology and artistry in working leather, metal, and textile. The sacrifice of horses was a significant element of steppe burial traditions, representing both the wealth of the deceased and the provision for their needs in the afterlife. The number and quality of horses buried with Genghis Khan would reflect his supreme status, perhaps including the specific horses he had ridden in his most famous battles. The religious objects that might be included in the tomb would illuminate the spiritual beliefs of the Mongols at a crucial moment in their history. Before the conversions to Buddhism and Islam that would transform Mongol culture in the following centuries, the Mongols practiced their ancestral Tengrism, with its worship of the sky god and its rituals conducted by shamans. Objects associated with shamanic practice, including drums, costumes, and implements, might be included to ensure spiritual protection for the Khan spirit. Amulets and protective symbols might be placed around the body or at the entrance to the burial chamber. The specific religious artifacts would provide direct evidence of Mongol spiritual life that is otherwise known only through textual sources, most of which were written by outsiders who may not have understood what they observed. The construction of the tomb itself would reveal Mongol architectural knowledge and the effort devoted to the burial. Was the body placed in a simple pit, covered and concealed without elaborate construction? Was there a wooden chamber like the log tombs found in some steppe burials, providing a protected space for the body and grave goods? Was there a stone structure, unusual for nomadic peoples but not impossible given the labour resources available to the Khan? The method of construction would have implications for preservation and for detection. A simple pit would be harder to find but would provide less protection for contents, while an elaborate chamber would be more detectable but would better preserve whatever it contained. The legendary accounts of the burial provide no details about tomb construction, leaving this crucial question unanswered. The future of the search for Genghis Khan's tomb depends on factors that are difficult to predict. Technological advances, political changes, economic conditions, and the accumulation of knowledge through ongoing research. Technology is improving constantly, with new methods of remote sensing, data analysis, and archaeological investigation emerging regularly. Techniques that are impossible or impractical today may become routine in a decade, allowing surveys that cover more ground with greater precision. Machine learning algorithms are being applied to satellite imagery, identifying patterns that human analysts might miss. Environmental DNA analysis can detect genetic material from ancient remains without excavation. The toolkit available to researchers expands each year, and each new tool offers another approach to the puzzle. Political factors will continue to shape access to the search area and the disposition of any discoveries. The Mongolian government has maintained control over research permits and has established policies that balance scientific investigation with cultural preservation. These policies could change with changes in government, economic pressure, or international relations. The relationship between Mongolia and its neighbours, particularly China and Russia, affects the political context of any search, since both countries have interests in Genghis Khan's legacy. International organisations and foreign governments that fund research also influence priorities and methods. The political landscape of the search is as complex as the physical landscape, requiring researchers to navigate relationships and regulations as well as mountains and valleys. Economic considerations affect both the resources available for searching and the incentives that drive the search. Archaeological research is expensive, requiring equipment, personnel, and logistics that must be funded from some source. Academic grants provide some support, but they are limited and competitive. Private funding, whether from individuals, corporations, or foundations, can provide larger resources but may come with conditions or expectations. The prospect of tourism revenue from a discovered tomb could influence government willingness to support and publicize a search. The economic value of artifacts that might be found raises difficult questions about ownership, preservation, and commercialization. The economics of the search intersect with ethics in ways that complicate decision-making. The accumulation of research findings over time may eventually produce a discovery, even if no single expedition succeeds. Each survey eliminates possibilities, narrowing the search area and refining hypotheses. Each archaeological investigation of related sites provides comparative data that helps interpret findings in the tomb search area. Each scholarly analysis of historical sources adds nuance to understanding of where and how the burial might have occurred. The search is a collective enterprise, building on the work of previous researchers and contributing to the work of those who will follow. A discovery might come suddenly through luck or insight, but it will rest on the foundation of accumulated knowledge that has been built over decades. The possibility that the tomb will never be found must be acknowledged. The measures taken to conceal it may have been too effective, leaving no traces that can be detected by any method. Natural processes may have destroyed or displaced whatever traces existed, erasing the signature that researchers seek. The tomb may lie in a location that no one has seriously considered, outside the search areas that have received attention, or the stories about the burial may be embellished or fictitious, describing elaborate concealment that never actually occurred for a grave that was simple and unmarked. 8 centuries is a long time, long enough for memories to fade and landscapes to change, long enough for a secret to become permanently lost. The mystery of Genghis Khan's tomb may endure as long as people remember his name, a question that can be asked but never answered. The meaning of the search extends beyond the possibility of discovery to the process of searching itself. The effort to find the tomb expresses human curiosity about the past, the desire to know what happened and to connect with those who came before. It expresses respect for achievement, even achievement accompanied by terrible destruction, recognition that some individuals shape history so profoundly that their physical remains become objects of fascination. It expresses the hope that mysteries can be solved, that patience and persistence and intelligence can overcome the obstacles that have defeated previous searchers. The search for Genghis Khan's tomb is part of the larger human project of understanding our history and our world, a project that continues regardless of whether any particular mystery is solved. Sleep comes now to those who have travelled far, across steppes and mountains, through centuries of history, following the trail of a conqueror to his unknown grave. The eternal blue sky of Mongolia stretches above, the same sky that Genghis Khan saw as the home of the supreme deity, the source of his mandate to conquer. The wolves howl in the forests of Burkhan Khaldun, guarding the secret that was entrusted to the mountains 800 years ago. The rivers flow as they have always flowed, indifferent to the searches conducted along their banks and the theories about what they might conceal. The grave remains hidden, protected by the same determination that won an empire, waiting for a discovery that may come tomorrow or may never come at all. Rest now in that mystery, and let the ancient steppe carry you into dreams of conquest and concealment, of glory and death, of secrets kept and secrets sought. The Khan sleeps somewhere in those mountains, and tonight, so do you. Good night. The steppe that Genghis Khan called home stretches across Central Asia in a vast band of grassland, one of the largest biomes on Earth, and one that has shaped human history in ways often overlooked by historians focused on settled civilizations. The steppe was a highway for ideas, goods, and people, connecting China to Europe long before the Silk Road merchants established their routes. It was also a nursery for warriors, producing wave after wave of nomadic peoples who burst upon the settled world with devastating effect. Scythians, Huns, Turks, and finally Mongols. The geography of the steppe selected for certain qualities, including mobility, archery, horsemanship, and the ability to survive on sparse resources. Genghis Khan was the culmination of this steppe tradition, the most successful of all the nomad conquerors, and his burial somewhere in that landscape connects him eternally to the world that produced him. The mythology of the Mongols placed Genghis Khan in a sacred lineage that connected him to cosmic forces and legendary ancestors. The wolf and deer, who were the mythical progenitors of the Mongol people, had produced a line of heroes and shamans, each generation building toward the world conqueror, who would unite the tribes and fulfill their destiny. Genghis Khan's own life was interpreted through this mythological framework. His birth holding a blood clot in his fist was a sign of future greatness. His survival of childhood dangers was proof of divine protection, His victories were manifestations of Tengri's favour. The mythology did not end with his death. His spirit was believed to continue protecting his descendants and his people, watching over them from whatever realm the dead inhabited. The hidden tomb was not merely a grave, but a spiritual nexus, a place where the living world touched the world of the ancestors. The transformation of Genghis Khan from historical figure to mythological hero occurred rapidly after his death and has continued ever since. Each generation has reinvented him according to its needs. The Mongol Khans who claimed his legacy, the Chinese emperors who absorbed the Mongols into their empire, the Soviet ideologists who condemned him as a feudal oppressor, the modern Mongolians who celebrate him as a national founder. The search for his tomb is part of this ongoing reinvention, an effort to connect the mythological figure to physical reality, to find the place where the legend becomes bone and artifact. Discovery would not end the mythology, but would transform it, providing a concrete reference point that would anchor the stories to a specific location. The tomb would become a pilgrimage site, a national shrine, a tourist destination, each function overlaying the others, and all overlaying the simple fact of a dead man buried in the earth. The landscape of Mongolia holds many secrets beyond the tomb of Genghis Khan. Archaeological sites scattered across the country preserve evidence of cultures stretching back thousands of years, from the Bronze Age deer stones to the Turkic stone figures to the countless burial mounds that dot the steppe. Most of these sites have never been systematically investigated. Mongolia's small population and limited resources have left vast areas unexplored by professional archaeologists. The search for Genghis Khan's tomb takes place within this broader context of archaeological potential, as researchers encounter unexpected findings while looking for something else. The region around Burkhan Khaldun may contain evidence of earlier occupations, of religious practices predating the Mongol period, of changes in climate and ecology recorded in sediments and remains. The tomb search is an opportunity for broader investigation. Whatever its ultimate success in finding its primary target, the night sky above Mongolia is unpolluted by the lights that obscure the stars elsewhere in the developed world. On a clear night, the Milky Way arches overhead in a brilliant band, and thousands of stars are visible to the naked eye. This was the sky that Genghis Khan knew, the eternal blue by day and the dome of stars by night, the cosmic order that gave meaning to earthly events. Modern researchers working in the region experience this sky as their predecessors did, reminded by its beauty of the spiritual significance that the Mongols attached to the heavens. The search for the tomb is conducted beneath this sky, under conditions that connect the present to the past more intimately than research conducted in laboratories or archives. The physical experience of being in Mongolia, of riding across the steppe and sleeping in gers and looking up at the unpolluted stars, shapes the way researchers understand the questions they are asking. The final mystery of Genghis Khan's grave may be that there is no mystery at all, that the burial was simple and the secrecy was achieved through simplicity rather than the elaborate engineering. A man buried in an unmarked grave on the steppe without monuments or markers would be lost within decades as the grass grew over the disturbed earth and the precise location faded from memory. The stories of mass executions and diverted rivers and planted forests might be embellishments that grew over time, each generation adding new elements to explain how the secret was kept. The truth might be that no special measures were needed, that the vastness of the landscape and the passage of time were sufficient to hide an ordinary burial in an extraordinary life. If this is the case, the tomb may never be found, not because it was hidden too well, but because there is nothing distinctive to find, no features that would identify one patch of steppe as the grave of the world conqueror. The descendants of Genghis Khan ruled much of Asia for centuries after his death, creating dynasties that shaped the history of China, Persia, Russia, and India. The Yuan dynasty in China, founded by his grandson Kublai Khan, ruled the most populous nation on earth for nearly a century. The Ilkhanate in Persia patronized art and science that produced some of the greatest achievements of Islamic civilization. The Golden Horde in Russia established patterns of governance that influenced Russian political culture for centuries. The Chagatai Khanate in Central Asia maintained Mongol traditions longest, preserving the language and customs that connected them to their ancestor. Even after these empires fell, the prestige of descent from Genghis Khan continued to matter. Timur, The great conqueror of the 14th century married into the Genghisid line to legitimize his rule, and the Mughal emperors of India claimed Genghisid ancestry through both Timur and Genghis Khan's son Chagatai. The blood of Genghis Khan flows through millions of people alive today, not only the 16 million men who carry his Y chromosome lineage, but countless others who descend from his daughters, his granddaughters, and the female lines that DNA studies cannot trace as easily. The intermarriage of Mongol royalty with the ruling families of conquered peoples spread his genetic legacy far beyond the steppe into the aristocracies of China, Persia, Russia, and beyond. The genetic studies that identified his probable lineage have sparked popular interest in ancestry testing, with many people discovering connections to Central Asian populations that might indicate descent from the Mongol elite. The search for the tomb is, in some sense, a search for a common ancestor, an effort to find the physical remains of a man whose genetic influence is still measurable 8 centuries after his death. That might reveal what lies beneath. They will interview herders and study historical sources and refine their hypotheses based on new evidence. They will hope that this year, this expedition, this method will be the one that finally succeeds, and even if they fail, as all previous searches have failed, they will contribute to the accumulating knowledge that might someday enable success. The search is its own reward, an adventure that connects modern people to ancient history, that takes them to one of the most beautiful and remote regions on Earth, that challenges them to solve a puzzle that has resisted solution for 8 centuries. The wolves of Burkhan Khaldun will continue their vigil, descendants of the wolves that howled when Genghis Khan was laid to rest. The eagles will continue to soar, their sharp eyes scanning terrain that holds secrets they cannot understand. The rivers will continue to flow, carrying snowmelt from the mountains to the distant sea, indifferent to the theories about what they might conceal. The seasons will turn as they have always turned, winter freezing the ground and summer bringing the brief bloom of wildflowers, year after year after year. The grave will keep its silence, revealing nothing to those who seek it, protected by the same forces that have protected it since 1227. The story of Genghis Khan is the story of human ambition carried to its furthest extreme, of a vision so vast that it encompassed the entire world known to its bearer. From his desperate childhood as an outcast on the steppe to his death, as the ruler of the largest empire ever created, his life traced an arc of achievement that has never been matched. The destruction he caused was immense, measured in millions of lives and the collapse of civilizations. The connections he created were equally vast, linking East and West in ways that would transform both. His legacy is written in the genes of millions of descendants, in the borders of nations that trace their origins to his empire, in the historical memory that keeps his name alive 8 centuries after his death. The hidden grave is the final chapter of that story, a mystery that reminds us that even the greatest conqueror could not conquer death, that even the man who ruled the world now lies unknown and unfound in the earth that bore him. The night deepens over Mongolia, and the stars wheel slowly overhead, the same stars that watched the funeral procession make its way to the secret burial site so long ago. The wind whispers through the grasses, carrying sounds that might be wolves or might be memory, the echoes of hoofbeats and commands in languages no longer spoken. Somewhere in the darkness, beneath the mountains that the Mongols held sacred, the grave of Genghis Khan waits in silence. It has waited for 800 years. It can wait forever. The secret that protects it is the secret of time itself, the way that the past slips away from us no matter how hard we try to hold it, the way that even the most powerful must eventually surrender to the earth. The conqueror who made the world tremble now lies still, his battles ended, his empire dissolved, his very location unknown. Only the mystery remains, and the endless search, and the hope that someday, somehow, the secret will be revealed. Rest now as the ancient steppe rests, patient and enduring beneath the eternal sky. Dream of horsemen riding across grasslands that stretch to every horizon, of gers rising like white mushrooms in the morning light, of a young chieftain looking up at the mountains and vowing to make the world his own. Dream of armies sweeping across continents, of cities burning and empires falling, of treasure accumulated and distributed and buried with the dead. Dream of the funeral procession winding through the valleys, carrying its precious burden to a destination no one would ever find, witnesses dying one by one until the secret was perfect and complete. Dream of the searches that have followed, Century after century, each one certain of success and each one ending in failure, the mystery intact, the grave still hidden. The greatest conqueror in history lies somewhere in those mountains, and no one knows where. That is the secret that protects him, the final victory of a man who won every battle but the last one, the battle against being forgotten. He lost that battle too, but he lost it on his own terms, leaving behind a mystery that ensures he will be remembered as long as people wonder about the past. Thank you for joining me on this journey across the steppes of Mongolia, through 8 centuries of history, to the hidden grave that has never been found. If you enjoyed this exploration, subscribe so you don't miss the next adventure into forgotten history. Leave a comment telling me where you're listening from tonight, and what mysteries you'd like to explore together. The stars are fading now as sleep approaches, and the mountains of Burkhan Khaldun stand dark against the lightening sky. Somewhere there, beneath rock and soil and the roots of ancient trees, the man who conquered the world sleeps his eternal sleep. The wolves know where, perhaps, and the eagles, but they keep the secret as faithfully as the soldiers who died to protect it. Good night, and may your dreams carry you across the endless steppe, beneath the eternal blue sky, to mysteries that wait to be discovered. Good night. The modern nation of Mongolia, with a population of just over 3 million people, occupies a territory larger than France, Germany and Spain combined. This vast emptiness preserves something of the landscape that Genghis Khan knew, a space where humans remain visitors rather than masters, where the steppe and the mountains and the rivers continue their ancient rhythms largely undisturbed. The sparse population is both a challenge and an opportunity for researchers seeking the tomb. There are few local witnesses to consult, but there is also little modern development to have destroyed or obscured potential sites. The same isolation that protects the wilderness also protects the mystery, keeping the search area remote from the urban centres where most archaeological expertise is concentrated. The herds of livestock that move across the Mongolian steppe today are descendants of animals that the Mongols have kept for thousands of years. Horses, sheep, goats, cattle and camels provide the basis of the traditional economy, supplying meat, milk, wool, leather, and transportation. The rhythms of herding shape the rhythms of life, with seasonal migrations that follow the availability of pasture and water. This pastoral lifestyle connects modern Mongolians to their ancestors in ways that sedentary peoples cannot experience. The skills required for herding are the same skills that Genghis Khan's people practiced, the relationship between humans and animals fundamentally unchanged. The herders who live near Burkhan Khaldun are the human inhabitants closest to the tomb, whatever its precise location, and their traditions may preserve knowledge that more distant observers have lost. The Nardam festival, held each July in Mongolia, celebrates the traditional skills of the Mongol people: wrestling, archery, and horse racing. These were the martial arts that created the Mongol Empire, the abilities that allowed small bands of warriors to defeat much larger armies and conquer civilizations. The festival is both a celebration of Mongolian identity and a connection to the past, a demonstration that the skills of Genghis Khan's warriors have not been forgotten. Modern Mongolians take pride in maintaining these traditions, seeing them as evidence of cultural continuity that links them to their illustrious ancestor. The search for the tomb is part of this same impulse, an effort to strengthen the connection between present and past, to find physical evidence of the history that the festival celebrates. The Buddhism that most Mongolians practice today arrived centuries after Genghis Khan's death, transforming Mongolian culture in ways that the original conqueror could not have anticipated. Monasteries dotted the landscape before the communist suppression, and many have been rebuilt since the democratic transition. Buddhist beliefs about death and the afterlife differ from the shamanic beliefs that would have guided Genghis Khan's burial, raising questions about how modern Mongolians understand the tomb and its significance. The search for the tomb involves negotiating between different religious frameworks, between the shamanic past and the Buddhist present, between traditional beliefs and modern secularism. The tomb, if found, would be interpreted through all these frameworks, each contributing to the meaning that Mongolians and others would attach to it. The written Mongolian language, using a script derived from Uyghur that is itself derived from Syriac, was developed during Genghis Khan's reign at his command. Before this, the Mongols had been an illiterate people, their traditions preserved through oral transmission. The creation of a writing system was part of Genghis Khan's project of empire building, a tool for administration and record-keeping that would allow governance at a distance. The secret history of the Mongols, composed in this new script within decades of his death, is the earliest substantial work of Mongolian literature and the most important source for understanding Genghis Khan's life and the culture of his people. The development of writing did not extend to making the tomb's location public. Whatever records might have existed were kept secret or destroyed, leaving only the vague references that have guided modern searchers. The silence of the Mongolian steppe is profound, a silence that city dwellers rarely experience. Away from roads and settlements, the only sounds are wind in the grass, birds calling, the movement of animals. This silence has a quality that connects the listener to deep time, to the centuries and millennia during which humans lived in small bands surrounded by vast emptiness. Genghis Khan knew this silence. He lived in it, fought in it, and now lies somewhere within it. The silence that surrounds his grave is the ultimate form of the secrecy that protected it, a silence so complete that 800 years of searching have not broken it. Those who seek the tomb must listen to this silence, must learn to read the landscape for signs that do not speak but only show, must accept that some questions may have no answers that humans can hear. The eternal blue sky that the Mongols worshipped stretches above all of this. The mountains, the steppe, the rivers, the searchers, and the hidden grave. Tengri, the supreme deity, was not an interventionist god who spoke to prophets or gave commandments, but a cosmic force that ordered the universe and granted favour to those who honoured it. Genghis Khan's success was attributed to Tengri's favour, his mandate to conquer coming from the sky itself. The sky that witnessed his triumphs also witnessed his burial, the only observer whose memory might extend back 8 centuries to know where the grave was placed. But the sky does not speak to researchers any more than it spoke to the Mongol shamans. It remains blue and silent and eternal, keeping whatever secrets it might hold. The mystery of Genghis Khan's grave is, in the end, a mystery of the sky and the earth, and the time that separates us from those who knew the answer. Sleep now beneath that eternal sky, and dream of the conqueror who sleeps beneath it too. Good night. The camels of Mongolia, the 2-humped Bactrian breed, adapted to the cold winters of the steppe, were among the animals that made the Mongol conquests possible. While horses provided speed and mobility for warriors, camels provided the logistics that kept armies supplied across vast distances. Camel caravans carried food, equipment, and plunder along routes that would later become the formal Silk Road, connecting the Mongol heartland to the conquered territories that stretched to the horizon. The camel's ability to go long periods without water and to carry heavy loads made it invaluable for campaigns across the deserts of Central Asia and China. If camels were part of the funeral procession that carried Genghis Khan to his grave, they too would have been killed to preserve the secret, their bones perhaps mingled with those of horses and humans in the earth around the tomb. The felt that insulates Mongolian jeers is made from the wool of sheep through a process that has remained essentially unchanged for millennia. Wet wool is spread on a mat, rolled and pressed and manipulated until the fibres interlock into a dense fabric that resists water, wind, and cold. This material, light and warm and portable, enabled the nomadic lifestyle that produced the Mongol Empire. Felt covered the jers where Khans held court, lined the saddles that carried warriors across continents, wrapped the bodies of the dead for burial. If Genghis Khan was buried according to traditional Mongol practices, his body would have been wrapped in felt, the familiar material of his daily life accompanying him into the afterlife. The felt would long since have decayed, but traces might remain, fragments preserved in the right conditions that could provide evidence of traditional burial practices. The eagles that Mongolian hunters trained to catch prey represent a bond between humans and wild creatures that stretches back thousands of years. The training of an eagle requires patience, skill, and a deep understanding of animal behavior, qualities that the Mongols developed through generations of practice. Eagle hunting was a sport for the elite, a demonstration of mastery over nature that distinguished nobles from commoners. Genghis Khan himself was reportedly an eagle hunter, enjoying the sport during the intervals between campaigns. The golden eagles that still soar above Burkan Khaldun are descendants of the birds that hunted during his lifetime, their eyes scanning the same terrain for the same prey. If the eagles could speak, they might tell us where the grave lies, but they remain silent, hunting as they have always hunted, indifferent to human questions about the past. The marmots that inhabit the Mongolian steppe were a crucial food source for the young Temujin during the desperate years after his father's death. When his family was abandoned by their clan and left to survive alone, they hunted marmots and other small game to supplement their meagre resources. This experience of privation shaped Genghis Khan's character, teaching him the determination and resourcefulness that would later enable his rise to power. Marmots still burrow across the steppe, their colonies visible as mounds of disturbed earth that dot the landscape. Researchers searching for the tomb must distinguish between marmot burrows and human excavations, between natural disturbances and those created by the burial party 8 centuries ago. The marmots, like the eagles and wolves, are unwitting keepers of the landscape's secrets, their activities both concealing and potentially revealing what lies beneath the surface. The winter storms that sweep across Mongolia can bury the landscape in snow within hours, transforming familiar terrain into a white wilderness where survival depends on finding shelter. These storms would have been familiar to Genghis Khan, whose campaigns continued through winter when enemies expected respite from warfare. The Mongol ability to operate in conditions that immobilized other armies gave them advantages that they exploited ruthlessly. If the funeral procession traveled during winter, the snow would have helped conceal their tracks, adding another layer of secrecy to an already elaborate concealment. The spring melt would have erased the remaining traces, leaving the landscape looking as it had before any human had passed. The winter storms continue to sweep across Mongolia each year, covering the mountains and valleys with white, hiding whatever might be hidden, keeping the secret for another season. The spring brings life back to the steppe after the frozen months, with grass greening and flowers blooming across the vast emptiness. This is the season when herders move their animals to fresh pasture, when migratory birds return from their winter grounds, when the cycle of growth and decay that drives the ecosystem begins again. The same cycle has repeated for millennia, long before Genghis Khan, and continuing long after, indifferent to human events that seem so important in the moment. The tomb, wherever it lies, has experienced this cycle 800 times, each spring bringing new growth, each winter bringing new snow, each year adding another layer of time between the burial and the present. The spring will come again to Birkenkalden, as it always comes, and the secret will remain, as it always remains, protected by time itself. The mystery endures because mysteries are what we have when the evidence is insufficient to provide answers. Genghis Khan's grave is unknown not because we have chosen to keep it unknown, but because the people who knew chose to keep it unknown, and they succeeded beyond what anyone could have expected. Their success is our mystery, their silence our endless speculation. We cannot know what they knew. We can only search for what they hid, hoping that time and technology and luck will reveal what human determination could not protect forever. Perhaps the tomb will be found tomorrow or next year or next century, or next. Perhaps it will never be found, the secret preserved eternally by the mountains and the forests and the endless steppe. Either way, the mystery will have served its purpose, keeping Genghis Khan alive in imagination long after his body returned to the earth. He conquered the world and was conquered by death, but his grave has conquered the searchers, remaining hidden while everything else about him has been exposed to history. That is the secret that protects it, and that is the mystery that draws us still. Good night.